I know. You know what I mean? Yeah, great.
Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, that's very quiet. Which one is this guy? This one is, right? Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. Testing, 1, 2, 3. That's a little better. Thank you.
Okay, I apologize. We had a robust discussion going on in executive. Apologize for being a few minutes late, but I'd like to call to order the regular meeting of the Morristown Township Board of Education. This meeting is called in conformance with the Open Public Meetings Act with adequate notice provided as follows. The notice filed with the Courier Post on July 1st, 2021, and a notice filed with the Burlington County Times on July 1st, 2021. I'd like to ask if we could have a moment of silence, not only our normal moment of silence that we do, but we have a staff member who lost her son recently, Cassie Gore, who's a teacher at the middle school. I'd also like to ask that we think of her during this moment of silence. Thank you. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, would you like to do the roll call, please, Mr. Secretary?
Dr. Alberti,
Here.
Mrs. Arcaro Burns,
Present.
Mr. Fairchild, Mrs. Fallis Macaluso, Mrs. McCopolis, Ms. Romano, Mr. Villanueva, Dr. Snyder, Mr. Weeks.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay. Moving on, I'd like to request approval of the minutes for the following meetings: January 4th, reorganization meeting, January 18th, executive session, and January 18th, regular meeting. I will entertain a motion now. And a second. Okay. Any questions, discussion? Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any abstentions? Okay. Abstention from Mr. Villanueva. Any opposed? Okay. Are there any Communications, anyone would like to share from the board?
I'd just like to share that on Thursday, Burlington County School Board Association is having their meeting. The topic is diversity and equity. It starts at 7, and you do have to register online in advance to get the link. It'll be a virtual meeting. And the March meeting has been changed. It's now going to be a president and vice president executive session with the Board of Ed members in the county.
Ms. Romano, any other communications from the board? Okay, moving on to president's remarks. I'd like to open my remarks by speaking to upcoming changes related to the expiration of the governor's executive order on masking, as well as the other guidance and direction the district has been following. While we do not have all of the details to share tonight, I am encouraged and optimistic about the trajectory we are on and would like to speak to why. We've reached a stage where there are many layers of protection available for our students and staff. As experts from the medical and infectious disease fields, as well as local authorities have noted, we now have access to safe and effective vaccines for all school-age children, as well as better availability of highly effective personal protective equipment. Our schools have upgraded ventilation and improved practices around cleaning, and opportunities are available for improved individual hygiene. We expect that parents and students will be able to choose to employ the solutions that work best for them and rely less on the choices of others. While we still strive to maintain and reinforce a collective sense of responsibility for safety, support, and well-being in our schools, we can also safely increase opportunities for choice. That progress should be noted and applauded. Throughout this crisis, the Board of Education and Administration have endeavored to be consistent. We have consistently put the safety and well-being of our school community first, adhere to the direction and guidance of state and local authorities, and strive to do so with empathy and thoughtfulness. As we deal with what we hope will be a continued progression towards normalcy, we will continue to be consistent in that approach. That means continuing to follow the direction and guidance with fidelity as best supports the needs of our school community. We are expecting to receive more guidance leading up to the March 7th expiration of the masking order, so that will provide an opportunity to continue to assess how we will move forward. Frankly stated, this experience has exposed some fissures in the relationships between the district and the community, as well as within the community. There were unfortunately many times where we experienced difficulty actively listening to and trusting each other. As we are all connected to this institution that exists to promote learning and growth, I would like to speak to a step we will be taking as we reflect on this experience and seek to learn and grow from it. With regard to listening, prior to the pandemic, I and other members of the school board recognized the limitations of the mandated structure of holding a board meeting in public rather than a public meeting. Specifically, it allows for a public comment period and not a question and answer session. That precluded a deeper engagement in topics where people can feel listened to. Seeking to help address that frustration, several years ago, we started holding community engagement forums around specific topics. Though they proved popular, they did not fully address more timely engagement on varied other topics in which there was an interest. We all want to feel that we are actively listened to when we speak and not just heard. Listening is defined as hearing something with thoughtful attention. While I know that we board members all pay attention thoughtfully during public comment, the lack of a better method of immediate follow-up can belie that notion for the speaker. Tonight, I would like to announce that we are opening up another facet of engagement to help address this. We will be adding a public comment section to our website where the community can share their comments in advance of the board meeting. Mr. Volpe and board leadership will look at what we've received, and we will endeavor to address the comments in the superintendent's or president's reports. We expect to have this up and running before the next board meeting in March, and I believe Mr. Volpe will speak to this in more detail in his report. This will not be the final step we take to increase communication and opportunities to actively listen in an effort to build dialogue, understanding, and trust. We are committed to continuing to explore ways to do this, and thankfully, we have an exceptional group of dedicated people as part of this body to help do that work. There will be more opportunities for dialogue with town halls we are planning to hold in the near future. I should also note that I have personally seen that Mr. Volpe and members of the board are responding to emails we receive. There are also opportunities during each of the home and school meetings. I know I participated in pretty much every home and school meeting save one, which Dr. Snyder did. So there are chances there to ask and have questions answered. Furthermore, our community communication survey, also, which Mr. Volpe will discuss in his remarks, will help inform us as we move forward in finding better ways to listen and communicate more effectively. So I also want to take a moment to inform the community about a significant change with the Board of Education. As you may have noted, Mr. Fairchild is not here on the dais with us. Effective yesterday, Mr. Fairchild tendered his resignation, which I reluctantly accepted, though with deep appreciation and understanding. He noted that he needs to prioritize time with his family, and we all understand and respect his decision. Mr. Fairchild was a strong and tireless advocate for the advancement, safety, and well-being of our students and staff. While it may not have always appeared that he was vocal, we all knew what Jack stood for, and most importantly, where his heart was. He is an extremely thoughtful and analytical person, and we are going to miss his dedication and input. Because we did not have a lot of time to prepare in advance of tonight, we will have more to say and hopefully be able to thank him in a better way at a subsequent meeting. However, tonight, on behalf of the board, I want to express my heartfelt thanks for his service. Thank you. That concludes my comments.
Certainly do.
Yeah, we can frog that. Sure. So let's jump down and have the student board representatives in the order that they choose. Yes, seniors rule. Ms. Hearn.
Sorry for the stumble. Hi, everybody. My name is Claire Hurin, and I am the senior class liaison. Tonight, I would like to talk about updates on the senior trip and my recent success in mock trial. So the senior trip will commence on April 2nd, and I believe it runs to the 7th. We are going to Universal this year instead of officially Disney. We are staying in Universal, as I talked about before. Little did I know, our final permission slip was due last week, and I was chased down the hallway by Mr. Seibel telling me that it was due. But he has been cracking down and getting everything in order. So it was signed. We're all good. So everybody who plans on going has officially signed up if they also completed the form. So everything is coming to a close. Our rooms are being settled pretty soon. A couple months ago, we filled out a form saying who we wanted to room with. It will be groups of 4. So that'll be officially settled hopefully soon. We are booking reservations and getting ready for our senior trip. And last week we finished our mock trial season. I had 1 loss and 1 win. Bordentown goes really hard, which is what I learned this year. However, we were victorious against Cinnaminson. So we are keeping your mock streets safe. Don't worry. And Perry Jordan was guilty. Thank you. So I learned a lot this year. Being a lawyer for the past couple of years, I served as a witness, which was really fun, but it was definitely a different perspective as a senior leader. Getting all the freshmen and sophomores together was like herding cats. But they were really eager, and it was really great to work with them and form new relationships and smile at new kids in the hall. So that was really fun, and I garnered a lot of new skills that I hope to use in the mock future or maybe in the real trial. We shall see. Thank you, and I'll pass it off to Lucas.
Thank you, Ms. Hearn.
Hello, my name is Lucas McGill, and I'm the junior class Board of Ed liaison. Just under 4 weeks, Morrison High School will be putting on its annual musical. The musical this year is Honk Jr., an adaptation of the story of the Ugly Duckling. The cast, crew, and pit have been hard at work for months to make sure the show is an enjoyable one for all. Opening night is March 4th with a total of 5 performances over 2 weekends. For more details and to purchase tickets, please check out the MHS website under the theater link. With prom season just around the corner, upper class students are already purchasing formal wear and lining up dates to attend the dance with. The theme for this year's dance is still being deliberated by the junior class officers, but we're very excited with the ideas we've come up with. There will be a fashion show during lunches in the near future to showcase some clothing ideas to the students, and the prom will be held at the new Doubletree Hotel on Friday, March 13th. Thank you very much, and make sure to go see me and my castmates in the show. I'll hand it off to yourself.
Thank you.
All right, good evening, board and parents. I'm Jack Britton, your sophomore class liaison. So I have two important updates on behalf of student council. We have been busy undertaking our winter and spring service projects. They will occur over the next 2 months. Each grade is running their own service project, and our own personal sophomore service project is donations to an animal shelter in need of donations this winter. And we'll be donating animal food and used towels to give to these animals in need during the winter time. Our other drives are to take place later this month. And also our freshmen as a drive he'll explain, and announcements and information have been given to the students. We're handing out flyers in hopes of good donation turnout this year. And these drives are an important way for us to give back to the community and a really staple of our student council experience here. Additionally, my second point is high school midterms have been completed. They completed in the beginning of February. Grades, if not already back, should be back shortly, which is exciting or stressful for some people. And reading days planned by administration went well, as did the midterms. In a return back to normal midterms, it seemed to go pretty smooth, and that's exciting to know. I hand off to our freshmen.
Hi, everyone. I'm Yvette, the freshman liaison. I'd like to start out by talking about midterms. Last time I was here, our midterms were about a week away. I'm very glad to report that they are now over, and all the grades are in. Most of my classes did very well, and most of my teachers told us that the average was higher than they expected. I think a big part of that was the 4 reading days, which really helped everyone. The second thing I want to go over is a service project. This week, the Freshman Student Council started our service project, which was donating lightly used or new blankets or new socks to Joseph's house, where they would be given to teens in our area who can't afford them. Last week, we put up posters all around the school advertising it. Today was the first day of the drive, but the collection starts tomorrow, so we will go around to all the homerooms and collect things that people have donated. Thank you and have a great evening.
Well, we appreciate those reports, and as in keeping with recent tradition, if you like to spend that time on homework, getting ready for those finals early. Please feel free. All right, thank you.
Good evening. Good evening. As your superintendent for less than 2 months, it's been an interesting 2 months. I'm incredibly happy with the reception that I have received to date and pleased that I've been able to interact with the community at several school and community events. This past Saturday, February 12th, was my first opportunity to visit the community house for the Interact Club Soup for the Soul event. I took my wife on a very cheap date there. It was great to talk to students and some community members, as well as enjoy some great soup. Additionally, I've been very grateful to meet many HSA parents at their meetings, as well as parents at quite a few athletic events I've attended. When you see me at other events in the future, please feel free to introduce yourself to me. Most importantly, I have been happy to meet and get to know students, some of whom are getting to know me by name. I find it amazing. I never knew what a superintendent was. I never knew who my superintendent was. And when I walk in hallways and kids call me by my name, it makes me feel really good. I've had the chance to interact with the high school student council who was here and tell them my story from the time I was in 7th grade until I became superintendent of schools. Speak to some members of our unified basketball team, as well as students from various clubs at the high school. Making connections with both the community and our students is both very important and very rewarding for me. As mentioned on February 10th, and as Mr. Weeks had said, based on the governor's recent announcement, Morristown Township Public Schools will be mask optional effective March 7th, 2022. This is aligned with the intent and language as stated in Board Policy 1648.11. While there are other issues still related to COVID that all schools must deal with, we are waiting to receive further guidance from the New Jersey Department of Health about these matters. At that time, we'll begin to analyze any such guidelines and assess their impact on the schools, and we will inform you of any important information. Speaking of important information, we have a scheduling change coming up at our high school. Recently, our school district received from the state the test administration details for the NJGPA. It's a new high-stakes testing graduation requirement for 11th graders. The state recently just identified the week of March 14th through 18th as the test week. In order to be able to provide the best testing environment for all, and in order to logistically preserve high-quality instruction for students after testing, on the aforementioned dates, we will be operating on a delayed opening schedule at the high school only for freshmen, sophomores, and seniors. Sorry, juniors, you're in school all day. We will also be having additional state testing known as the NJSLA sometime between late April and early June. Again, we're looking at all options pertaining to that test administration, and we may similarly announce a delayed opening schedule for those dates as well. We haven't decided that yet. The NJGPA we have. You will be informed well in advance of the testing dates should that be the decision. Finally, as Mr. Weeks mentioned, as we look to improve our communication efforts, can my slide go up there, Jeff, or no? Yeah, it's just one slide. As we look to improve our communication efforts, we are partnering with the Haddon Township School District Communication Consortium. As a first step, shortly we will be asking all stakeholders, meaning employees, parents, and community members who don't have children in the school, to complete an online survey regarding district communications. After the survey data is collected, a series of focus groups will be scheduled for all stakeholders to take a deeper look into our district communications and answer questions about what's working well and what needs to improve. We will be seeking a diverse group of stakeholders to participate in the focus groups to be sure we're hearing from as many people as possible. All the data gathered through surveys and focus groups will be utilized to draft a comprehensive communication action plan. Ultimately, the plan should include specific goals, objectives, and action steps. It is likely that implementation for such a comprehensive plan can take anywhere from 1 to 3 years. Barring any unforeseen delays, we hope to release the plan to everyone sometime in May. And finally, I know I said finally twice, as Mr. Weeks had said, we are looking to communicate further with the community. And shortly, I'll be sending out additional information about a link on our board agenda page, where if you have items that you would like to see either Mr. Weeks or I address in future comments, because you're not getting that interaction that you would like to have, we will do so. We can't promise to answer everyone's question all the time. We will look for general themes and take those into account as we try to best address your needs as community members. That being said, almost on 2 months, I'm really enjoying my time here, getting to know you. Again, if you see me at events, please come up and say hi. And that's my report for today.
Thank you, Mr. Volpe. I think now we will move to our next presentation, which will be the Board of Education Ethics Training. This is something we do on an annual basis. We want to make sure that all the board members are aware of their roles and responsibilities, understanding the ethics surrounding those. And we think it's important, even more so this year as we have 3 new board members, for us to hear this. And so I should also kind of go back to my earlier point about this being basically our business meeting in public. That's why we feel it's important for the public to understand what it is that we are given in terms of our guidance on this, and know that this is an ongoing conversation, not just a one-time practice, but this is just the main part of it. So with that, Mr. Comegno.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dylan's going to help me with the advancing slides. Mr. Volpe, I'd note that you passed your first Morristown test calling it a community house.
Yep, thank you.
Mr. Volpe saw my slides earlier and he said that they're thorough, which is usually code for too darn long. So I will endeavor to be terse. Good evening. As President Weeks mentioned, this is part of required annual training. We're going to talk tonight about the role of the board. We're going to talk tonight about the role of the administration. We're going to talk about what board meetings are. And we're going to get into what at times can be, as Judge Buck often says, as clear as mud. Dylan, if you could advance, please. None of you expected that slide. What does the great 1962 cult classic, The Brain That Wouldn't Die, have to do with being here? And I was not in this movie. Dylan, if you could. That fella was the special effects coordinator for The Brain That Wouldn't Die. He is also why, folks, we are here in public. Our Open Public Meetings Act is actually called the Senator Byron M. Baer Open Public Meetings Act. the rules when it comes to public comment, the rules when it comes to actions of boards, the rules with regard to public notification, the rules that we have to start before 8 o'clock at night. All these kinds of things getting into the weeds comes from what we refer to as the OPMA, the OPMA, different than the OPRA, the Open Public Records Act. Dylan, please. So from a summary, folks, and the role of a board member in New Jersey is different than any other elected office. It's different than being elected to council. It's different than being elected to the assembly, to the Senate, governor. And that's because of the goal of this board is different than those other elected offices. This board is the governing body of the school district. It is the executive. You all have individual voice. You're elected. You're elected from the community. You get to cast a vote. But in much of what we're going to be talking about and much of what the public sees, the actions that you take are part of a collective. You're charged with high-level policy-making decisions. Oftentimes, you actually can't take action. Decision-making and authority is limited in that you can't administer the schools. Only the entity can enter into contracts or other binding agreements. Dylan, please. I would ask you, and something to ponder, and new members receive required ethics training through school boards in addition to this, and there are updates as well in your free time. Think about, can you ever take your hat off? Are you just board members when you're sitting here? Are you just board members when you're at committee? Are you just board members at certain times? And when you're in Wegmans, when you're on the athletic field, when you're at your kids' events, are you a board member or are you not? Those First Amendment protections that we have and rights that we have. Thanks, Jeff. You have them. But as some of the ethics cases provide, you got to be super deliberate when it comes to words. You're governed by a code of ethics, which we're going to talk about tonight, which is set forth here in 18A. And I'll ask the board, what's the role of the school board member? What's your role? How would you characterize your role? Thank you, Mark. Mark's like, John's still being rhetorical. I'll be polite and listen.
Oh, and the awkward silence. No, I think we are a policy-making board, and we also are to develop a budget for the school board. I mean, those are the two of the primary, not exclusive
Absolutely.
roles.
Absolutely. Thank you.
And to select a superintendent.
Probably the most important thing that you do. Thank you, Mark.
Can I add a few more?
Please.
To be the communications link between the community at large and the administration. So to foster that culture of inclusion when it comes to communications, and to set the clear goals and objectives for the superintendent and to hold him accountable in achieving same.
Thank you. One of the ethics tenets actually specifically says, you know this, to interpret the wishes of the community, like other elected officials. And certainly, when you talk about the superintendent, how many employees does the board have? One. The board has one employee, just one, right? The most important thing you do, select your superintendent, evaluate your superintendent, set goals, hold accountable, right? Communicate. It's often said that the role of the school board member is not to administer the schools, but to see that they are well administered. What's the purpose of a school board meeting? And Mick spoke to this really eloquently before, and it can be frustrating, I know, to the community, because we're not under a gold dome in Trenton, right? It doesn't feel like we have this formality. We're in a library. But the law requires public comment, not Q&A, right? What's the purpose of a school board meeting? Anybody want to chime in?
Have a meeting in public.
Thank you. And I would add to that, to take action.
I was gonna say, can you, I think, I don't know if this is the right place to say this, but one of the things that's been coming up when we talk about communications is having a meeting in public versus being a public meeting.
Right.
And I think that the distinctions there are kind of important to lay out. So if it's okay, if you could take a minute to do that, I
Sure.
think it would be helpful.
And again, Mick was talking about this. The Open Public Meetings Act requires, when there's a quorum, right, when there's a majority of you, because there's legal effect to your actions, you got to provide notice. And you're present in that quorum to do certain things. We're going to talk about the difference between boards of committees and boards of committee of the whole. A board like ours that has committees, has a finance and operations committee, has a policy committee, has other committees. That committee work is not done here. There's no quorum. Public's not invited. But here, when you're here present, you're here to take action. And the purpose of the meeting is so that, in the Open Public Meetings Act, is to permit the public to watch your action, to hear your action, to see your action, and to offer comment. That's why it's called public comment, not public Q&A. And that's why also the public gets two opportunities. The first public comment is about agenda items. Hey, I see, you've got this personnel item. I see you have this business item. I see you have this contract. I'm going to offer my thoughts on it. And that's why the first public comment is limited to that. Second public comment's broad, right? So it's a meeting of the board in public, which is different than having a meeting with the public. And Mick talked before about town halls. He talked about other types of meetings that could facilitate a back and forth and a communication. And that, of course, is not to say, folks, that the public can't be heard, because the public at any time can reach out to the superintendent. As you often hear, you come up and ask questions, and the response is, talk to the superintendent, talk to HR, talk to special services, talk to, etc. I'm not going to go through, please.
These are always sneaky. With respect to other types of communication channels, like forums where the community can be heard and have more dialogue, just to clarify, in those settings, it's only board leadership, or is it everyone? Because I know there's quorum issues with all 9 of
Exactly.
us being together.
Well, if
So
5 of
or
you are
8
there,
now.
right? 5, excuse me for interrupting, but a quorum is just a simple majority. So that's why those types of meetings typically are less than 5.
Or, right, or we advertise that no action will be taken.
Correct. Good? Thank you. I'm not going to go through, folks, every single tenet of the School Ethics Act. There are many. And I'm going to highlight those where we see the most ethics complaints. And the School Ethics Commission is charged with hearing complaints. School Ethics Commission can also receive advisory requests. Would this violate? Would that violate? No micromanaging. This is the language of the act. I will carry out my responsibility not to administer the schools, but together with my fellow board members to see that they are well run. We talked about this concept. Here's a couple of cases. One from Sussex Wantage. Board member violated the code when he unilaterally visited the school and took pictures of open windows in the middle school and items in the board office bathroom, which he then spoke about to reporters. No individual action. In advisory opinion, board member would violate the act by participating in an exit interview or even merely observing the exit interview, because he'd be breaching the obligation to refrain from becoming directly involved in those day-to-day activities, particularly when it comes to personnel. You'll see on the agenda, superintendent recommends. It goes directly to this, in that the State Department of Ed charges the superintendent through his certification, through his licensure, with certain responsibility and has certain training to make certain recommendations and to ensure, by way of roll-up certification and expertise, to ensure that HR did what it was supposed to do, to ensure that curriculum is done what it's supposed to do, to ensure that the business office has done what it's supposed to do, so that you can rely upon those representations. Jill, did you have a comment, question?
I had a question, but
Please.
not to interrupt you. I just
Please.
felt like that. So those are great examples of things that are truly, clearly operational and a board member micromanaging and stepping into the shoes of the superintendent or the administration. But I would like clarification and maybe your point of view on a principle that was often discussed at the community level and at the board table over the last 18 to 24 months with the pandemic. There was a lot of churn around the distinction between policy, which is clearly a board responsibility, and operations, which is of course the responsibility of the superintendent and administration. Would you mind just speaking to that a little bit and clarifying for me how you see that split of responsibilities?
Thank you for the courtesy of that question. Have the last 18 to 24 months been charged? The last 18 to 24 months have been the greatest study in difficulty in public education that hopefully we will ever see. The board, absent policy action, would not have, technically, legally, a voice on going from 6 feet to 3 feet. The board, the mandate goes away. Absent policy action, the board would not be taking action, would not be required to take action to say masks or no masks. When we talk policy, we're talking uppercase P, and we got up the bylaws and then the 1,000 and the 2,000, the 3,000, et cetera. This board elected with the recommendation of the prior superintendent to take specific policy action. You know this. And there were certain appendices that included certain protocols. That's an example of policy action. This board elected to do that, and that put those protocols directly in front of the board to consider, to analyze, to discuss, debate, take action. I will tell you, there were districts that did not. There was a determination made here, going back now a year and a half ago or so, that since certain law referred to action being taken by boards, that policy action would be taken. Strauss Esme, our policy depository, provides recommendations to us as well, recommended it. That's an example of policy. Operations, what time does the building open and close? What does the schedule look like? What days are we going to be in session or not? Oftentimes, that's not a board conversation. Now, we've had them here because the board approves a calendar, right? But oftentimes, and I think we could be guided by when we talk about policy, uppercase P. Certainly those things that are in written policy are up to the board. If they're not, even if they're in a regulation, they're not up for board action. Thank you for your question.
I'm like a little hung up. Let me double click on one area. So the required, in the beginning of what you said, you talked about some schools did and some schools didn't get involved, for example, in 6v3 feet. So this idea of, is it, the board is not required, but can they get involved? Can you clarify that a little bit? Because
I was just using that as an example.
Yeah, no, so not 6v3, pick something else. This idea of
So
when
how
the
about
board
the-
is required versus can,
How about?
versus going too far and getting involved in operations. Does that make sense, the spectrum?
Sure, it would be too far. We changed here at the middle school, the dismissal flow. I don't know if anybody has any opinions on that. My kids are long past that, right? For the board to say, hey, you know what? We really ought to be going east to west, not west to east. And also we closed off this lane, right? That's too far. That's operational. I understand that the wrestlers used to meet in this room and now they're meeting in that room. I understand that the spring musical is being offered on this weekend. It used to be on that weekend. I understand, this is even talking about personnel. We've assigned this individual to teach this level of chemistry. I really think that she's better suited to biology. That's too far.
They're real life examples. So when you're talking about operationalizing or implementing recommendations from, for example, a state agency like the Department of Health, is that considered policy or operations?
I would respond by saying why and how and when. Well, when I say why are we having the conversation? Is it about an agenda item? How is it here? Is it at a committee level? And when, right? Is it right to have that conversation or not? I am going to talk about, we'll get to it about the 9 o'clock hour. Thank you. I am going to get to this conversation of a standard of care. And, we've got a surplus of lawyers on the board. They could talk about standard of care. But a lot of that gets to the standard of care, right? We got no option with the masks. After March 7, we do. We've got no options right now when we talk about contact tracing. We hear there's going to be more coming. We've heard before there's going to be more coming. What's the standard of care? Who do we look to and why? How are we going to make that decision? So I will get to that. Thank you. I will confine my board action to policy making, planning, and appraisal. I will help frame policies and plans only after the board has consulted those who will be affected by them. And that is discerned in the community. That's also discerned through the administration. I'll skip these cases, I'm mindful of our time. What information may a school board member access? You may access the information that you need to make a decision. We've talked about this with HIB matters. We've talked about this with discipline matters. We've talked about this with personnel. There are some districts where I have heard conversations about we want to see personnel files before we make a decision about a new hire. That is not this board. But what level of information is needed to take the action, there are limits and there are reasonable limits. That's the point. Skip through some of these slides, folks. A board of the whole is different than a board by committee. As you might guess, a board by committee operates by committees that do not sit here and have their conversations in public. They also don't have a quorum. There are 3 or 4 members that meet periodically, and the public hears reports, the public hears summaries. They're often here very detailed, stepping through those minutes. Facilities is going to consider, policy is going to consider. That's different than a board of the whole, where a board meets publicly and has all those conversations and presentations, wrestles with decisions publicly. And it's an important difference because the level of conversation is different. The level of questioning is different. There's a certain element of trust placed by the board in making that governance decision to operate by committee that his or her colleagues are having appropriate conversations, are considering the right information, and that when those recommendations come forward, you can rely upon them. Our policy here says committees are authorized. Are board members rubber stamping personnel and other recommendations? I think that folks in the public may think that there's rubber stamping at times when questions aren't asked. And please know that there is a tremendous amount. It's like the iceberg. There's a tremendous amount of action that happens behind the scenes at the committee level, which can be hours and hours and hours. And discussion in executive session and preparation of agendas before folks come out here. Board members are not rubber stamping personnel and other recommendations. Board members do have a responsibility to follow recommendation unless you conclude it's arbitrary, unless you conclude the process. There was a comment before about patterns. Unless you conclude that the right questions weren't asked, unless you conclude that the process is flawed, unless you keep hearing certain issues, right? I will vote to appoint the best qualified personnel available after considering the recommendation of the chief administrative officer. That's just required by law. And a couple of examples. Central Regional. Board members didn't violate the code when they voted not to reappoint an employee to a former position despite the contrary recommendation because, and it gets to that why. Why did they vote against? Well, because They knew the prior experience because they knew the qualifications of other folks who had applied. I will support and protect school personnel in the proper performance of their duties. This can be involved, folks. Public employees have more protections under law than private sector employees do. And board members are charged to be sensitive to those rights, to report concerns to the superintendent, the board president, and make sure that an administrative process happens to chase down concerns. Certainly not to bring up concerns here. This is why RICE notices have to be issued, and if employees going to be discussed. This is why personnel discussions happen in exec. And a couple of examples here, really difficult examples. Hillsborough, famous community. Board member violated the code when he sent an email to the superintendent, also sent to the BA and all other board members, that was threatening and intimidating, putting the superintendent on the spot to provide an accounting and personal leave. So when the law says support district personnel, it's all district personnel. Come on. Maybe I'll just do this trick. Oh, it went. Look at this. President of the board violated the code by posting the following comments on his Facebook page and a link to a picture of the superintendent. Now, if we could only do something about our local terrorists that destroy dreams and burn futures. Don't do that. Is the role of the board president different? It is. You self-govern. You're one of 9. The chair has certain additional responsibilities, certain additional roles listed here: presiding, directing the board secretary during meetings, taking certain specific legal action. The only individual who's authorized to speak on behalf of the Board of Education is the board president. Appoints committees, serves as a member of committees. Each one, he has a right to go. What happens after a split vote? Is the issue decided? Right? It's a democracy. I have a right to my opinion. I have a right to keep bringing it up, right? Yes and no. The SEC here said, in the context of a dispute over contract, once the issue is decided, once the vote is cast, that's it. If it's a budget issue, it comes up annually. If it's a programming issue, it could be brought up at another time. If it's a single issue, comes up once and goes, you have a right to speak your mind. You have a right to ask questions in the vote, and you have a right to cast your vote. Once the vote is cast and tallied, whether it goes up or down, that's it. Here's Jill's very important question. NJSA, the law, NJAC, regulation, executive orders. I'll stop right there. Are they binding on school boards, or may the board exercise discretion? We stop right there. You say this when you're sworn in. I will uphold and enforce all laws, rules, and regulations of the state board. Desired change shall be brought about only through legal and ethical procedures. And there's been a tremendous amount of conversation about COVID guidance, COVID recommendations. Executive orders have effective law, right? Regulations, rules of the state board, go back here. All of this ain't discretionary. But then when we come over to here, this is where the hand wringing comes. 6 feet, 3 feet, 10 days, 5 days, how we contact trace, how we don't, what is going to happen when the masks come off. Students are circulating more differently. Are we bound to follow guidance? I think there's 2 answers. The federal money had strings attached to it. You know this. compelled the board to follow certain guidance and recommendations. Once we get past that, folks, the rest of this guidance is guidance.
I have some questions. Oh, sorry.
Yeah, let me finish my thought and then we'll talk about it. And then we get to this. How does the school district determine the standard of care? Because that's the legal issue. And we have conversations regularly about this. Some standard of care is obvious, right? Standard of care, the responsibility we have to one another, the responsibility the district has to make sure this room is safe, the responsibility we have to make sure our buses are safe, the responsibility we have to make sure our classrooms are safe, a reasonable standard of care. I was thinking about this today. COVID hit us domestically March of 20. We fast forward to March of 21. We knew a whole hell of a lot more about COVID than we did March of 20. March 22, we're going to know a lot more. If you remember back to March of 20, there were folks that were taking their mail and putting it in their garage and letting it cool out for days. There were folks that were using antiseptic wipes and wiping everything down. Remember those days? And look back now, it's unnecessary. Our understanding of what's needed and what's necessary has evolved. This has evolved. And I come back to my answer before. It's super important for any entity to ask the question of why are we following or why are we disregarding? And if we're disregarding, how are we disregarding? Are we disregarding certain recommendation because 50% of the school districts in this county are also? Because the State Department of Ed has said this is not binding? Because we're green or yellow? Because case rates are down? Because vaccination rates and booster rates are, from a percentage standpoint, where they are? We're social distancing in the way we are? Or are we disregarding, if we're disregarding, because we don't like it? Because certain sources say it doesn't have substance. The standard of care with something like this evolves. And this, I think, is the conversation when we talk about recommendations and we talk about guidance. Because the potential legal exposure is, it's disregarded, there's an outbreak, someone gets sick, and there's legal claim. And then we get into those things the lawyers and the board could talk about. What's foreseeable, what's reasonable, what's not. If, and proving causation with an infectious disease, is tough, right? Where and how. But if it can be proven, then boards have to be able to answer the question, why did we not do these things? Jill, please, I'm done.
Oh, no, that was really helpful. You clarified a couple of things for me, but I have one very specific question and then one like fuzzier question with a comment. So the very specific question is with regard to the federal funding and the strings that are attached. Are those strings attached to us following laws, regulations, and executive orders, which have the net effect of a law, as you mentioned? Or are they also ticked and tied to following recommendations in the public health guidance like the CDC and New Jersey Department of Health?
Certainly the former and also the latter to a certain extent. I think, though, that conversation of what the strings are and when they applied and attached, we're getting past. Those COVID relief dollars have been received and allocated and spent. And that conversation and that analysis goes back a year, not so much now.
Okay, yeah, that's helpful. But I guess my fuzzier comment / question is just, I find it hard to believe that the state agencies intend for us to adopt all of the recommendations outlined in a public health guidance, because it says in the guidance itself, these are recommendations. And even in like the FAQs and things, they say you should adopt what makes sense. There's no one size fits all approach. Adopt what makes sense based on your local circumstances. For example, vaccination rate, community transmission, in-school transmission. Have we had an outbreak? No. So I would just think that we could, fulfill our ethical responsibilities and exercise our standard of care, a reasonable standard of care but still take a more pragmatic approach to whether or not we're going to implement as policy every recommendation that comes from a state agency. And I'd actually ask, my second part is, I'm very focused right now on the COVID guidance, but this is applicable to all of the guidance coming from state agencies that impacts MTPS. So can you speak a little beyond COVID, if you will? Because like we've all agreed, we're turning a corner.
Sure. What's the heat indicator called? The wet ball, what's it called? James gonna know. James knows.
Wet bulb
See?
temperature.
Of course,
Yeah.
James knows.
Yeah.
There are certain days it's recommended that our football players not take the field in August. Do they, or do they not? And that's one indicator of what's recommended or not, right? I mean, we could talk about recommendations all day long. We could talk about how many people are allowed to be in a place. We could talk about how many people get in an elevator. We could talk about certain stressors on certain facilities, right? I think those are other examples. And what do we do in interpreting that? We look to folks that can make facilities recommendations. We look to folks who can make security recommendations when it comes to our internet. We look to folks who can make sophisticated recommendations when it comes to, curriculum, learning accommodation, all those kinds of things, right? I digress. Let me move this along, folks, because I'm mindful of our time, and I would just sit here and talk about this all night.
John, I'm sorry, I just want to clarify one thing.
Please.
What I heard as get past the strings attached to the federal dollars was spending the money. Is that accurate? Because I feel like that's what I heard.
If the board has a specific question about the federal dollars received and what strings were attached, what I would suggest is that James and I answer that question specifically, and we're
Okay.
happy to do that.
And then the second thing was, I guess I'm having a little bit of a harder time.
Please.
Sir, please don't interrupt. This is not the public comment time. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you.
And just with standard of care, I know, obviously in the medical field, it has a very specific
Right.
definition. It's evidence-based, it's data-driven.
It's prevailing trends in the community.
So is that standard of care length, is that definition anywhere that we can reference?
I think that, well, standard of care is a legal concept that we apply to different circumstances as to the responsibilities between people, right? There's a standard of care when you leave tonight and you get in your car and you follow the speed limit. There's a standard of care if there's ice in the morning, whether or not Mike's going to let the buses run or what we do with the sidewalks, right? So when we talk about standard of care and an evolving standard of care, educators often talk about change in education taking decades. COVID required change overnight. So interpreting what that standard of care is and what responsibility there is to safeguard one another has taken time. So can we look to 18A? Can we look to 6A? Can we look to an executive order to say these are all the things that factor into the standard of care? What I would suggest is they all do. The question becomes, just as Jill noted, does it require every single recommendation? And I think the answer is no, it doesn't. But discerning which and when and how is why we have to answer the question of why did we accept these and disregard those? Thank you. I will recognize that authority rests with the board and will make no personal promise nor take any private action that may compromise the board. That's obvious what it means. Similarly, I'll refuse to surrender independent judgment to special interest or partisan political groups. Use the schools for personal gain or for the gain of friends. There's a reason why board office is nonpartisan. And this gets to that. What board information is confidential? Folks, everything is confidential except for what's in that agenda and what's discussed at a public meeting, frankly. Certainly personnel, certainly student information, HIB, the kinds of things that happen in exec are confidential and remain confidential. We talked about this with regard to another tenant. May a board member investigate a community concern? The answer is yes, but not individually. Interpreting the wishes and questions of the community. A community member asks a question that can be referred to the administration for answer. Specifically, I will refer all complaints to the chief administrative officer and will act on the complaints at public meetings only after failure of an administrative solution. That kind of gets to the no surprise rule. Certain individuals also have certain contractual protections that complaints have to be brought to their attention. Volunteering, and then I'm going to wrap up. Your role changes when you go from parent in the community, member of the community, to being on the board, and then having ultimate executive authority over all employees of the district. And the SEC speaks to that. The SEC encourages, and this often cuts folks, because you look at a community, who's most involved? Who's involved in home and school? Who's involved in sports? Who's involved in other things? Oftentimes it's the folks who run for the board. But the SEC recognizes that when you're part of this executive, you also can't, and there's an advisory opinion here, you can't also co-direct a play where you're subject to the direction of a teacher and a building principal who is subject to the direction of the superintendent who's subject to your direction. Volunteering has to be one-offs, has to be here and there, taking tickets, raising money, not directing employees. That's what these say. Thank you for your time and thank you for your great questions.
I just want to make one comment. And thank you for the presentation. But the issue with respect to decisions that the school board made during the pandemic, was required to make, or was strongly suggested to make, was somehow tied to money. I've heard discussion about that, like, and seen it on Facebook. I have never seen anything to suggest that our decisions were tied to money that was being given by the federal government or state government. If in fact that's true, and I'm not saying that that's not true. If it were true, I didn't know about it in anything that I did. Because if it were true, that absolutely would have impacted how strongly I would have advocated against masking our kids, forcing our staff to get vaccinated, having quarantine periods based on whether you're vaccinated or boosted or any of this other stuff. So I take exception to that statement as having an impact on individual board members in the decisions that we made. I don't know if you were trying to infer that, but it certainly did not play any role in any decision that I made.
So let me clarify, and I certainly did not intend to say that board member decisions were motivated by federal dollars. I was commenting on the federal dollars as it related to what's required and what's not. Period. I was speaking to votes and our conversations about appendices and protocols because the board took policy action. The board was able to take policy action specifically as it related to COVID protocols because it was set forth in policy. That's all. Separate concepts. This board, and let me be super clear to the public, this board did not take action.
ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds were received.
Sir.
Correct or no? No, it is the time, Mick. ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funds were received. I'm almost $1 million, right? Like 800,000 for ESSER 2.
Mr. Knick,
So no, answer the question.
No, he's not going to speak to it. This is not
That's
the
messed
proper
up.
process. Listen, this is not the process. Sir, this is not the process. Please,
Answer the question.
Sir, if you're going to continue to interrupt the meeting, we're going to have to ask you to leave. Bill,
I'm asking a simple question.
and Bill, we are happy to take your question. Bill, let's be reasonable. You can come to me, ask me this question after the meeting. You can talk to Mr. Volpe. Hang on. This is not the proper process. I have an ethical responsibility, you just saw, to follow the process. I am managing this meeting the way it's supposed to be managed, and I will continue to do that. Follow my ethical responsibility. Thank you. So, did you have anything else to say to Mr. Villanueva? Okay, that concludes the presentation. Okay. So, was there anything else under superintendent's remarks?
Not this time.
Okay, thank you. We've already done student board representatives. We are now going to move to board committee reports. Who would like to start with the board committee reports? Okay, please, Sandra with communication.
James.
I'm sorry. That's why I asked if you were done with superintendent comment. Budget update. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Weeks. So the board members, some of this information was communicated through brass tacks as well as included within Mr. Villanueva's update with our recent finance and operations committee. All of our department and building level budgets have been compiled and combined into our district level budget. After we did so, we were approximately $7.6 million over cap. As of today, the budget's now down to $5.4 million over cap. The reductions that have been made so far to balance the budget and to add into that reduction from the 7.6 to the 5.4 are in the following areas. Capital outlay, we reduced approximately 1.163 million out of our capital outlay request. The largest item there is about $1 million to resurface the tennis courts. That's an item that's been routinely included in the budget and cut through that process of balancing the budget. New personnel, the cuts that we've had to new personnel requests have amounted to approximately $415,000. We've had lease purchase reductions in the amount of $750,000 in overall requests. Our lease purchase is over a 5-year span. So that amounted to roughly $150,000 in reductions to our lease purchase lines in the budget. Our department and school level reductions, principals and department heads have been requested to reduce new requests out of their budgets and prioritize their new requests. Those cuts have resulted in approximately $330,000 in reductions. Our individual departments and schools are still evaluating their individual budgets. So we'll continue that process over the next days and next 2 weeks to come. Key dates moving forward. Just yesterday, I believe it was late last night, actually, the governor's budget address was originally scheduled for February 22nd. That has been moved to March 8th. We're awaiting additional guidance on that. We're hoping that something comes out for estimated state aid numbers because March 8th is a very, very late date to get our school aid numbers. So hopefully we'll have more on that. I will communicate that out to the full board once we know more. The week of February 21st, we'll have a release on our insurance premium increases. That's for both our health insurance as well as our general lines of insurance. Right now, I have a 5% increase built into the budget, but we're hoping that that obviously is less than that 5%, and that will add to balance in the budget. Between March 1st and March 8th, I'll be in communication with Mr. Weeks on a board budget workshop, as well as Mr. Villanueva for our annual board budget workshop, where we'll go into greater detail on the budget. March 15th is our scheduled budget introduction. March 21st, the budget's due to the county. And obviously you can see how that March 8th date is really late in all of this. April 20th is our last day to advertise the budget for formal adoption. And then April 26th is our board meeting of which we will adopt the 22-23 budget.
Thank you, Mr. Board Secretary. Okay, does that conclude?
That concludes the superintendent.
Superintendent's
Yes,
monthly
thank you.
report. Okay, thank you. Okay, let's move on to board committee reports. I believe Dr. Alberti,
So this,
ready to go?
I'm here to present the Communications Committee meeting and happy to say much of it has already been moved forward since we talked about it in committee on January 26th. Present at the meeting was Mr. Volpe, Dr. Tate, myself, McWeeks, Jill Fowles Macaluso, and Melissa Arcaro Burns. And we also had guest Lori Perlow, who works at the Haddon Township Communications Consortium. We talked first about generally what we hoped for as a committee and launching goals and expectations. We talked about the revised COVID dashboard and the daily COVID email that is now in place, that we've transitioned to refer folks to the dashboard rather than every day getting the email. There's now a link to get to the dashboard. We talked about the ideas behind that we still want to be transparent. We still want the information there, and that there is, that it's not to hide any information, but to make more efficient and understandable the information that we have there. And we will hope that the community finds that to be helpful as well. We then spent time going over what ended up being Mr. Volpe's slide there about the communications process and how we are going to engage with Haddon Township Communications Consortium. I think we've all lived into this need for improved communications, and this is just one very structured way to do that. One of the things that is true of the survey that we'll engage in is that it is developed by a third party so that we can norm and compare our results to what other districts, other communities are doing as a way to learn. It's another benefit of being part of a consortium in that as well. But it does limit us in customizing the survey to the Morristown community. And so we have interest in timing and length of that survey so that hopefully as many people as possible will participate so that we can get a good sense of the needs for that. In addition to the survey, the consortium is able to help us with media relations, branding work, crisis communications, PR, marketing, all of those things, which we haven't had a communications person like on staff in Morristown. And so this was a very economical way to get some really important expertise as we move forward. We also talked at the Communications Committee about the public comment submissions and did some brainstorming about good, effective ways to do that. And again, it was announced by both Mr. Weeks and Mr. Volpe that that's something that we look forward to doing and monitoring its effectiveness going forward. And then we also talked a bit about Mr. Volpe's interest in hosting town halls and how we might support that work going forward, how we engage the community who sits in those panels and that kind of thing. And I think that's something that we will continue to roll out as another opportunity for engagement going forward. Any questions?
I have a few questions about the new public comment website. I'm not sure if I'm phrasing it the right way, but I wasn't aware that it was being rolled out until just, or I guess at 7 o'clock. So who's responding to that public comment website? I mean, is that a board communication platform or an administration communication platform?
I don't want to overemphasize what it is. What we'll be doing is we'll be setting up a link, like a Google form that people can access when they go to check out the board agendas or the minutes or anything like that. And they'll have an opportunity to put in things that they would like to see spoken about or a specific question. It'll go to James in his role as board secretary, and then James can forward that to both Mick and myself, and it will help craft our superintendent's remarks and our president's remarks. So I want to be very clear about that. You may ask a question and it may not be something that we specifically address, but if we start to see patterns of questions, like things that we're unaware of, Mr. Weeks and I can go back and forth and say, hey, do you want to address this in yours or should I? It seems to be a community need. 7 people have reached out to ask us to address that, and it's not something we've addressed. So it's not going to be a specific back and forth. It will end up going to James in his role as board secretary, and then Mick and I can craft things around that.
Okay, so I guess it's not really a public comment.
Yeah,
So it's not like this is in lieu of
correct.
public comment.
Yes.
This is sort of a repository of questions, comments, concerns.
And
whatever.
I will certainly make that clear that it's not in lieu of public comments. Anybody who submits a question, comment, or concern through the website is still welcome to come to a meeting and give additional actual public comments. This is like some guiding ideas to help form our communications.
Got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's really, oh, go ahead.
I was just gonna say to that point in the minutes, Mark, we put that we make sure that this is not linked to public comment. This is just another opportunity to communicate with the board and superintendent, but that this is, to your point, very distinct from public.
Yeah, that's all I was going to say, that it's another avenue to, because public comment is not a Q&A session, this is a vehicle for the community members at large to, like Mike said, feedback, concerns, questions, and then at least as I understand it, Mike, during your superintendent's remarks, you will thematically address some of those areas.
Sure. Like I said, I can't guarantee to everybody who responds that I will address every single, but especially if I see themes and patterns. If it wasn't something I was going to address, I feel it's my obligation to address that if it's a pressing community concern.
So maybe for purposes of clarity, we should brand it very clearly when we launch
I will.
it and not use.
It will not be called public comment. It will not be called public comment when it's all said and out.
Yeah, and just to add to that, the thinking around this was, as everybody just saw who made it through the excellent presentation that Mr. Camagno made. I enjoyed it, actually. We have, preset guidelines that we have to follow. So this is a way to try to look at those guidelines and find ways, as I said in my opening remarks, we want to have this dialogue, we want communication, we want understanding. What happens sometimes is people make comment, they may have that comment before they come. And so if they do, please send it to us. And then we'll use, all the tools we have. One of them may be to speak to it in either the president's or the superintendent's remarks. One of them may be to reach out to that person directly, right? So this is just, we want the public to be aware that there are ways to communicate with us. There's a process. And since we're on the topic, let me address, again, what is going on here. This works when we follow the processes. And we need to do that. And we want to make sure that we are open and accessible, but within the parameters with which, we conduct these meetings. So, we will have public comment in a few moments. We hope people understand what public comment is about, but that is not the only way to voice your concerns, to express your questions, and to get responses from us. If you want the responses, please follow the processes. We are more than happy to engage in those processes and follow through with you. Okay. So hopefully, Mr. Villanueva, I don't want to get too far from your question. That speaks to it.
Yeah, it did. I mean, and we don't need to talk about it here. I have some thoughts about it that we can talk about.
Okay. Well, yeah.
I don't want to burden the record any more than it is.
From what I understand, the keystrokes are free here. So
now we got it. It's recording. So
yes, that too. YouTube's not charging.
Just to that, so thank you, Sandra, for the update. Working in the communications field, to the points that you guys are making, communications tends to be a really broad term that means different things to different people. So we've done communication surveys before. In some respects, not with a lot of effect or not with a necessary effect. So I think it would be really helpful, I think, defining, I see the board is really trying to create more opportunities for transparency and open discussion. And I think it's really important to make sure we're defining, we're clearly articulating what those opportunities are, how we're defining them, and continually reminding people, because we're close to this, we do this every day, basically, but not everybody does, and they don't always know the best way to reach out and the best way to get information. So it's kind of a suggestion as we go through the process to really make sure that we're keeping that in the back of our minds, that this isn't everyone's day job or volunteer day job. So, but also to that point, I was wondering, in your initial conversations with Lori, I think her name is,
Lori Perlow.
have you talked about like examples of what some of the output might be for the action plan? Like, can we just give the community a little bit of an idea of, and us, what we'll see as that action plan? Like, do you know yet what type of output?
Yeah, I mean, so far what she's talked to us about is, who she's going to talk to, the stakeholder groups, but also things like, where do people prefer to go for their information? The kinds of platforms, frequency of communication, kind of structural things. And we're going to be able to take a look at the survey before it goes out. Like I said, we don't have much opportunity to tailor it, but now knowing, Cheryl, that you have an expertise in this, I would appreciate any, input that you have to help us. But I do think, to your point, previously, we've had a communications committee for a while. We care deeply about this work. We're part of the community. We have a sense of communications. I also can appreciate that there is an expertise, and one of the affordances that being part of a consortium allows us to do is, without having somebody fully on staff to do that work, we're able to access, and she works with a number of school districts across the state. She shared with us that she is the president of whatever the Association of School Communications People. So she's very talented and comes well respected, and so hopefully it'll do more than just I'll say my scratch and itch that we have, but actually move us to some effective actions, and that will present that, and hopefully people will feel heard and validated in their own versions of what communication looks like in what we plan going forward.
Can I just piggyback off of what you said, Sandra, because I'm on the communications committee and I really loved being part of it. And I thought that we had a really productive, at least first meeting for me. And the way to your specific question, Cheryl, some of the things that Lori Perlow gave as examples of tactics that we might employ, aligned with this strategic vision to foster a culture of trust and transparency through communications, would be updates to our website, leveraging more modern technologies, using social media. Those are examples of things that we might use as additional communication levers or tactics to pull, aligned with the strategic plan that we have to evolve communications to foster a culture of trust and transparency. That said, we agreed as a committee that we also wanted to make incremental steps before we, got the feedback from the parent community through this survey and through the, and I should clarify, not just the parent community, the community at large, through the survey and the forums. And I think that so many of the things that Mr. Volpe have done really are a testament to that. You're like an expert in communications with the emails and the, things that you're planning. So I feel like we're already well on our way in fostering this cultural aspiration we're trying to achieve through a multi-year communication strategy. And did I, that's the way I saw it. Yeah.
Any other comments or questions for the Communications Committee minutes? Okay, hearing none, we can move on to policy, which I understand, Dr. Snyder, you're going to take over that for now.
Yep, absolutely. So we had a really robust conversation, to be honest, about a number of things that aren't on the agenda. So I'll start there, and then I can quickly highlight what is on the agenda. So our conversation around 164811, obviously most of it has been handled and spoken to already. In the context of the policy itself, no change needs to be made to the policy as it stands right now. And as things develop, I suspect either it will or it will just get removed completely, depending on how the next set of guidance and month goes. But the other thing we talked about in the context of COVID is the dashboard and the emails changing, and how that, again, does not require a policy change. We had a rather large conversation about the dress code, which again, the dress code in Morristown policy 5511 does not need to be changed. What we spoke about specifically are the very specific dress, and I won't call it code, dress policy that is in the high school handbook. And again, to kind of refresh everybody, starting there and then moving down to the middle school and UES. So Principal Drew Seibel came and presented sort of the process that he has gone through up until now and where they are. So they had 30 students in the committee across all the grades and all different groups of students, student council, faculty, advisory council, home and school council. Everybody has had a chance to weigh in, and with the overall goal being to remove the subjectivity in the language and to align it with a more equitable way to approach dress policy. I shouldn't say policy, but dress code. The discussion that remains is sort of how to handle special events, which again has always been the case. So he didn't think that would be a problem in terms of delineating how that would be different. The one very specific thing was in light of, again, the width of the shoulder strap specific to a tank top for male or female. And again, how many fingers? So there was still some sort of subjectivity, and we were trying to sort of advocate that that not be the case. So that is still something that is being determined. The other things that we spoke about were making sure that this is rolled out in a coherent way so that staff and students know exactly what it means and what the expectations are, where dress will be addressed in terms of the day and in terms of the location, so that it is done equitably across, students wouldn't feel like they were being picked on and those kinds of things by staff. So again, this will be something that will be in the handbook, which we adopt in the spring. And the policy itself does not address any of these things. So it is really specific to the handbook. And again, echoing the sort of successful process that they went through so far, it would then be looked at and how that can be applied to the middle school and sort of using that same template. The next thing we talked about was policy 5530, which is the substance abuse policy. This is, again, probably several meetings away from being on the agenda, but the overall goal of the administration, and again, this is specific to the high school, but it is a district-wide policy, was on trying to more adequately represent the restrictions for the students and the way to understand the use and misuse of either over-the-counter or illegal drugs and the various permutations of those as they pertain to our students. Again, as it stands now, there's a 2-strike policy moving to more of a 3-strike, which again, I'm not in favor of thinking of it that way, but in the context of how many opportunities students have for demonstrating, appropriate use. And again, this gets to a lot of subtle gray areas when it comes to the over-the-counter prescription, illegal substances. And again, the conversation I thought was really helpful, at least for me, in trying to understand. And as it stands now, he's going back to both our district legal counsel and medical professionals to try to understand exactly what falls into these categories. Again, I don't think it is different from other contexts of policy when we want to sort of remove that subjectivity and make it so that it is very clear and gives the students and the school the opportunities, and I should say, and the guidelines that they feel are appropriate. We looked at policy 9180 and 9188, which deal with volunteers, very specifically just removing the minimum number of hours for background checks and making it more based on role. So again, there will be some volunteers who will be exempt if they are under a direct supervision. And we tried to, again, the way the policy will then be crafted is more about the roles and responsibilities of the volunteer as opposed to, and the sort of frequency, as opposed to some number of hours, which can be kind of arbitrary. So again, this deals with requiring the volunteer to get background check, criminal record check, which anyone who does coaching or anything knows is sort of required for being around our students. The organizational meeting change policy 151 is on the agenda. This just has to do with changing the time at which we have our reorg meeting. I think it was a legacy thing. So we have our reorg meeting in January since we have our elections in November. The policies that are actually on for first reading are that one, and the others are all mandated. So policy 241505, which deals with specifically rewritten to provide additional detail regarding requirements outlined in the federal code with student surveys, analysis, evaluations, examinations. The regulation 2460.30 deals specifically with offering up to 1 year of additional compensatory special ed services in light of COVID for students. But again, it is specific within the child study team and the IEP that it be required. So it's not a blanket eligibility, but that this additional year of special ed services is available. And then the two dealing with student assessment, 2622, deals specifically with implementing an approved English language proficiency assessment for English language learners with an individualized IEP to measure students' progress in English proficiency. And the 9560, administration of school surveys, the new statute allows school districts to administer anonymous voluntary, does not, without prior notification to parents. So you can't give anonymous voluntary surveys, analysis. And again, those are all language changes that are mandated. So again, those are the only ones that are on the agenda. The other conversations will be following.
Questions, comments? Policy? Okay, hearing none. Can we please move on to finance and operations? And knowing we just met Monday, thank you for getting the notes.
We met yesterday morning, hours after an exciting Super Bowl that ended on a 4th and 1. We started our morning off talking about the 2020 to 21 audit exit conference.
Riveting.
Which was riveting. So we had, committee was present, administration was present. I won't walk through all the names. We had our auditors from Holt McNally and Associates join us for the meeting yesterday. Mike Holt and David Gorski, who conducted our annual audit for the year ended June 30, 2021. As is typical, our financial statements were found to be presented fairly in all material respects, with no material issues. As I noted in the minutes, which is reflected on the agenda today, there was one area that requires I'll call it a plan of correction. I don't know if that's technically the correct term, but corrective action plan. With respect to our food service account, there is a statute or regulation code provision that requires the districts, all districts, food service counts not to accumulate more than 3 months worth of expenditures at any given point. And in 2020 to 2021, the district realized a substantial amount of revenue as it related to food service, given reimbursements from the government as it related to our lunch program. And we also had low expenses because we weren't in the buildings as often. So unfortunately, regulations also don't allow us to use those revenue streams for other areas of the normal operating budget. So food service money can only be used for food service related expenses. So ultimately we generated, the fund exceeded the permissible amount. We have now developed James and his team have developed a corrective action plan to ensure that doesn't happen again, which is part of the agenda this evening. But we walked through in high level detail the comprehensive annual financial report that is available for everyone's review once it's published. And I encourage people to read it. It is actually a treasure trove of useful information concerning enrollments, amount we spend per pupil, those kind of statistics related to our operations are contained in that audited report. If you Google it, you can find it. We also talked about the district calendars that are on the agenda for tonight. The first calendar is this year's calendar, which we are adjusting to have 181 days rather than 182 student days, given the snow days that we've taken. I think at administration's recommendation, and I think the entire board has, through various committees, have talked about the various options associated with dealing with this issue, one of which was to have a school day on the Friday of spring break, which nobody thought was a great idea. At least nobody that I've heard thought that was a great idea. So we have reduced the number of days to 181 for this school year, and we are statutorily required to have 180. So we have some wiggle room in there, which we are taking advantage of this year. The 2023 calendar is also on the agenda tonight. I don't want to steal your thunder, Mr. Volpe, but there's a sort of, I think it's kind of a potential cool feature of the calendar is there's 2 snow days built in. If we don't use those snow days, the Memorial Day weekend could be extended by 2 days, which could be a nice sort of, a nice break if we don't use the snow days. So we'll see how what the weather does. We also talked about things we already discussed in terms of the new guidance from, the governor's direction that the mask mandate will be lifted on March 7th, but we're awaiting guidance, as Mr. Volpe and Mr. Weeks had articulated in their opening comments. Mr. Heiser already gave the budget overview, so I won't retread that ground, and that's about it. Any questions?
I have a question. So it's with regard to the audit that was conducted. It sounds like you did a root cause analysis and put a good corrective action plan in place. But I'm just wondering, this is a little bit sideways from the corrective action plan. Do you think there's an opportunity to consider whether the quality of school lunches could be assessed and potentially improved? So there has been a lot of buzz in the parent community that there's an opportunity to address the quality of lunches. And so I'm not saying that there is a problem, but perhaps if there were, we could assess whether or not we could provide more quality and more helpful options. Right now, of course, we get every student gets free lunch, but in any other years, there's the reduced and free lunch for students that are eligible. And then, other students can purchase lunch. So perhaps there's just an opportunity to use some of these additional funds from a quality standpoint. Did you talk at all about that or have any considerations?
I could say that we didn't talk about that as it pertains to the financial audit. I'm not necessarily sure the two issues are directly tied together, but I'll defer to James, who's much more familiar.
Yeah, and all I was saying was if there's additional funding that can only be used for food service, which is what I'm understanding, it can't be reallocated to fund, textbooks, then is there an opportunity perhaps to, consider as part of the corrective action plan, assessing whether or not we need to enhance the quality of lunches for all students, just to be clear?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. I actually have a meeting this Friday with our NutriServe food management director to have some of those discussions as well as last year, the reason why this is ultimately generated as a finding, number one, it's called a net cash resources finding. It's required. They're required to put it in as a finding. It's one of the frustrating things where this is what's called an enterprise fund, and we're told that this is where you can make money, but don't make too much. So it can be frustrating because you have to balance that. Now you have 3 months average expenditures that you cannot exceed, and that's what this is. To give you a perspective of what we did last year to kind of help offset some of the general budget expenditures as well, we did a substantial amount of deliveries last year of meals. I charged bus drivers salaries for that period of time for delivering the meals to the food service fund, as well as the custodial support for loading up the buses, as well as some paraprofessional salaries for assisting with that as well. That was in tune of about $170,000, or I'm sorry, $100,000. Then we purchased new equipment in the tune of $170,000. So one of the things that we want to do going forward is we want to look at this, and it is an opportunity to use the funds to get creative in this area. But at the same time, this was generated specifically related to how we operated under COVID. I operated the food service fund out of one building with limited staff, and we got so efficient that when you got 7 days worth of meals, you got a gallon of milk, and we didn't give you the boxes of milk because they cost more money. We got down to that level of detail. So when we're back operating normally, we can't necessarily expect to generate that level of revenue. So we want to make sure it's sustainable as well. But yes, we are having those conversations.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments? Finance and operations? Okay, thank you, Mr. Villanueva. That leaves curriculum. Ms.
Hey.
Romano?
We had our meeting January 20th. In attendance was Mike Volpe, Karen Benton, Mark Snyder, Sandra Alberti, Cheryl McCopolis, myself, Drew Seibel, and Kat D'Ambra. We discussed the 22-23 high school program of study review. Drew and Kat presented the proposed high school program of studies for next school year. In general, they also provided the update that was discussed earlier by Mr. Volpe about the change, the adjustment to the schedule with regards to the state graduation assessment requirements. So we discussed the student requirements for graduation for the class of 2023, 2024, and 2025. We took a look at the new courses that would be offered next year. The one course was publication and communication design, along with NJ GPA recitation and portfolio. We discussed the redesign of courses. Introduction to mechanical engineering will become introduction to engineering systems, and introduction to electrical engineering will become introduction to robotics. There was a discussion about having honors CAD 1 and honors architecture will become honors CAD and architecture 1, and honors CAD 2 and honors architecture design will become honors CAD and architecture 2, along with CAD 3 will become honors CAD and architecture 3. We take a look at future considerations of courses that Drew and Kat were looking to implement in the upcoming years as well. The discussion was also about the district is moving away from Project Lead the Way to reflect shifts in the next generation science standards in a more dynamic project-based learning manner. We were looking towards future grants to continue the funding of the new programs, realignment and expansion of classroom needs. The courses discussed at the high school would require budgeting for curriculum writing costs this summer, but not the additional staff. We then took a look at, and because our meeting was right after last board meeting, we took a look at the pre-K and kindergarten programs, the tuition increases, registration dates, and the integrated pre-K updates that were discussed in F&O in January. We took a look at the EDC summer enrichment tuition and brochure. We took we looked at again because Dr. Benton had just given the Start Strong assessment. We took a more in-depth look at that presentation. We reviewed the process for identifying struggling students and providing necessary support to them. Karen was going to do a deeper dive into mid-year student placements and basic skills needs and report that back. And then we also discussed how the information could be used appropriately throughout the district to support struggling students. Additional points we were going to look at in future was ways to, again, improve communication of curriculum and instructional shifts and changes at the committee reporting level, administration, and by building and grade levels.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rubano. Any questions or comments about that report? Cheryl? Excuse me, Ms. McCoppel.
Thank you, Lauren. Just on the last point, this is my first curriculum meeting, and I thought it was very useful to hear all the conversation. I didn't know a lot of what was going on because it was all new to me and a lot of acronyms. So one of the things that there was some discussion of changing standards. So one of the things that I asked for going forward, and Dr. Benton graciously agreed to, was to prepare a little bit more information about what are the current standards and what is the change to the standards and why specifically are we making these decisions to address that. So, or what exactly is it that we're doing and why? So I really appreciate you doing that for me as we can understand more what these changes are and what the implications are. So thank you. Not just for me, it's for everyone, but I just mean, so I could ask better questions.
Anybody else? Okay. Any off-board committees that there are reports from?
I have a short one for, I'm the new liaison to the Recreation Advisory Committee. The students left, but if they're watching, I'm sure they are. There's the Teen Cafe event is coming back to the rec center. Apparently it hasn't happened since March 2019, and it's going to be March 19th at the rec center. It's free. Kids are from 9th to 12th are welcome. That's grades 9 to grade 12. It's apparently a pretty fun event, and they're looking for donations of like snacks, drinks, not alcoholic, obviously, for the event. So that's that.
Villanueva. We're gonna do more arts.
I am the liaison to More Arts, and I just wanted to make a quick mention that More Arts does a lot of fundraising and a lot of great things for all the arts, whether it's voice, music, drawing. Their gala was planned for the end of January. They shifted gears to make it more of an art show to sell art as a fundraiser. Snowstorm hit, it ended up all being online. They did an amazing job pivoting. They were very happy with the return that they made. I would highly suggest supporting them. They do great things for the community, including scholarships and grants to the teachers for the classroom. So I just wanted to give them a little bit of a mention for doing such a great job in our community.
Thank you. Anyone else? All right, that concludes the board committee reports. Now moving on to public comment. You would like to entertain a motion to open public comment. Actually, motion is requested to open the floor for public comment. So, Mark and Lauren. Okay, so we will begin this. Actually, Dr. Snyder, can I ask you to do the timing? When your name is called, I'm sorry, when you come up to the mic to speak, please state your name and address. You'll have 3 minutes to speak. And as you know, this is not a question and answer back and forth engagement period. We've tried to be clear today and at other times that this is a place where you can make comments, but please avail yourself of the other opportunities if it is a question that you want answered. Certainly, as we said, email, we're going to have the website, we're going to have lots of different opportunities for that. But with that said, please do not address board members individually. Please be respectful when making public comment. So please come up to the mic if you would like to participate in that.
Good evening. My name is Mariana Now, but I'm here to read a testimony from Ms. Fresia Hernandez. Thank you for the opportunity of giving testimony today. My name is Fresia Hernandez, and I worked for the Morristown District for 3 years before losing my job when a cleaner contractor was hired and refused to keep all 27 of us on board due to our affiliation with the union. We not only lost our income, but also our health insurance, legal support, and benefits. It's been 7 months since that day, and I wanted to give you an update. Luz Ortega, who was 5 months pregnant when she lost her health insurance, had a baby. It was a girl. And sadly, we lost one of our coworkers, Mr. Felix Mendoza, who was 77 years old and had been working for district for over 10 years. He passed away last October, and because he lost his health insurance on July 1st, left a slew of medical bills for his family to now pay. And last, but definitely not least, the Region 4 of the National Labor Board has determined to prosecute the cleaning contractor, HSCG, and the company is now liable for over $500,000 in back wages, benefits, and consequential bills. Members of the board, it's been 7 months. We're still not back at work in the district. We still do not have health insurance. The schools are still underserved, but we're still fighting. To the parents, thank you for supporting us on this fight. We will continue and hope that we will resolve this soon so that we can all get back to work and move forward. Thank you.
So thank you for that comment. I just want to amend what I should have said when I opened public comment. This is, and I apologize for not saying this. This section of public comment is for public comment on agenda items. We will have a public comment section at the end for other items. No, I apologize. I did not make that clear. So I'm not in any way, I'm just saying it for now going forward. But thank you for your comment. Okay. Anybody else for agenda item comments? Okay, I'm hearing none. I'm not seeing anybody approach the mic. I will ask for a motion to close public comment. Dr. Snyder, Dr. Alberti. Okay, thank you. All in favor? Oh. Stay that motion.
How's everybody doing? I think you know who I am, right? Bill Blanche, 325 Springhouse Lane. Mr. Volpe, thank you for being a leader, because you did address the March 7th update, which now we can be mask optional, which I think is exceptional. So we can clap to that, right? We finally can be a parent again. We're finally able to make decisions about our children again. So thank you for that. I find it extremely disturbing, and I know a lot of board members here, so I just find it disturbing when we have board members that aren't aware that we have accepted funds to make decisions on behalf of our children. And Mark, I'm glad you brought that up, because you're an advocate for our kids, and I appreciate you and everything you do on this board. I don't mean to point you out like this. I probably should have used your name.
Thank you.
Got it. Always make mistakes. But nonetheless, is everybody aware that Morristown Township accepted funds, ESSER 1 and ESSER 2 funding, to keep our kids in mass? Is anybody aware of this? Because you bragged about how you spent $100,000 and $170,000 about food. I'd like to know how these ESSER funds were spent. So is that in the budget? That'll be an email I'll be sending to you very shortly, because to me, That doesn't sit well with me. But you want to smell your breath in a wet mask for 8 hours and try to learn as a kid? Doesn't work. To me, that's stupid. Doesn't work. But $1 million, $1 million, I think it was 200,000 ESSER 1, 895,000 ESSER 2 funds were given to this Board of Ed. Right? How was that spent? That's what I want to know. And thank you. That's all I'm going to say. Respectfully, thank you for the time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening. Rachel Lacazzi, 405 Park Lane, Morristown. I'd like to thank Mr. Volpe and the board for being proactive and making a fast announcement about Morristown's mask optional policy beginning on March 7th. I appreciate Mr. Volpe's leadership style and clear method of communication with the district. And I'm also excited to hear tonight about the new platform for public comment that will make it easier for the community to participate and feel heard at meetings like this. I just want to speak quickly on a couple issues pertaining to lunch in our schools. 2 of my children attend Morristown Public Schools. My daughter's in the 4th grade at the UES, and my son is a 2nd grader at Baker. I recognize that we are in a shifting landscape regarding COVID policies and hope things continue to trend back towards normal. However, I want to bring to your attention differences in the way that MTPS students are experiencing lunch in case it's not on your radar. At the UES, my daughter and her classmates are still seated in individual desks facing forward in rows. Seats are assigned and they've not been changed all year. She tells me they're not allowed to turn around during lunch or talk to their friends and must mask up as soon as they are finished eating. On the other hand, at Baker, the students sit at long tables separated into groups of 4 with space in between the groups. For my son, lunch feels normal again and fun. And for my daughter, it's the most unpleasant part of her school day. They come home, they compare experiences, and then they look to me, their mother, for answers, and I don't have any answers. Perhaps there's a difference that I'm not aware of. I acknowledge that. But from the children's perspective, they just want to know why COVID is different in one school versus the other. And second, at both schools, if children forget their water bottles, there are no water fountains available anymore, and there's also no backup water supply. So my kids have both on different occasions forgotten their water. They come home after 7 hours saying they had no water and none is available. So I'm asking you to please consider having some supply of bottled water for children who forget, or a water cooler somewhere in the building with disposable cups, or perhaps turning the water fountains back on at some point as soon as it's appropriate. I know a student at the high school just wrote an editorial about the lack of water there. I don't have a child in that building, but again, same issue. And why are the vending machines at the high school still empty? Perhaps that's something else that could be changed in the near future. I'm sure we can all agree that water is an essential element to a school day. Finally, if the situation at the UAS does not change soon, will you consider allowing the children to change their seats once in a while? And perhaps consider letting the students at all the school eat outside when the weather permits this spring? Thank you.
So thank you for the comments. Again, these are comments, this comment period is for agenda items, and I don't see anything we're voting on that for that, but we will have another comment period at the end. So are there any other comments related to agenda items that we can entertain now? Any other public comment? Okay. So do I need those motions again, or we actually had a motion? Okay, so all in favor of closing public comment on agenda items? Any abstentions? No nays? Okay, thank you. Okay, moving on. We are now up to, I don't want to skip anything. Section 8. I'm sorry, before I move on, Mr. Volpe, did you want to amend your comments? Did you want to add anything right now?
I'll wait till the 10.
Okay, all right. Okay, so item 8, reports to the board. A, business administrator, board secretary. Let's see. Number 1, financial report to the board secretary. Number 2, treasurer's report. Number 3, cafeteria report. Number 4, approvals of budget transfers. Number 5, approval of bills. May I have a motion for approval of items 1 through 5? In a second. Any discussion about any of those? Okay. Seeing none, I'll call a vote. All in favor? Any opposed? Abstentions?
Yep, abstaining from 1 to cafeteria report, 3, 4, and 5. All of them.
So abstention general on that one. And I was in favor. I forgot to say aye. Okay. And then
1
Cheryl.
through 5.
Okay. Motion carries. All right. All right, moving on. Section 9, recommendations of the superintendent. Letter A, 2021-2022 revised school calendar. Letter B, 2022-23 school calendar.
They're separate.
Others. Okay, so we're gonna vote separately on it. I'm sorry. Okay. So letter A, 2021-2022 revised school calendar. I recommend the board approve this, the revised 2021-22 school calendar attached as exhibit 22-201. I'll entertain a motion to approve that. Second. Okay, any comments, discussion? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Moving on to letter B, 2022-2023 school calendar. I'll entertain a motion to approve the calendar for this year. Burns, second. Any questions? All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Then on to C, the 3-year start and end dates for school years. 2022-23, 23-24, and 24-25. The start and end dates for those specific years. I'll entertain a motion to approve those dates. Okay, any questions, comments?
I wonder if Mr. Wilby could just speak to the process.
Sure. Sorry, I have problems with the microphones. Yeah, this was a new process to me. And apparently in Morristown, for many years, you have put together 3 years worth of start and end dates. I got involved in that process for the first time this year, obviously. I was highly skeptical of the process because I thought it needed to be something that was done by central administration and the board. But it was very collaborative. It was done with union leadership. It was done with teachers. It was done with the HSA. It was done with cabinet and board leadership. And we looked at calendars. We counted dates. We tried to build in snow days. It was a very collaborative effort. So what you're seeing here is not something that I just sat at my desk or Mick sat at his desk and we said, hey, we're going to come together. We looked at the needs of the community from multiple different perspectives and came up with the 3 sets of dates, as well as the revised calendar for this year and next year's calendar. And I think it went so smoothly as we've approved those other ones. There weren't even any questions because I think everybody got their questions answered in advance. But the process, I was a skeptic. It worked out great. And I want to thank Mr. Pandy, who's sitting back there, and anybody else here who was involved in that. I know Mr. Weeks, you were there as well, but it worked very smoothly. And that's kind of what the process was, very collaborative.
Thank you.
And also just to add something that you had mentioned before, what's nice is that people now know 22, 23, 23, 24, 24, 25, those school years, at least what the start and end dates of school will be.
Sure, you can start planning your vacations if you need.
Graduations, all of those things. So any other questions or comments? Okay, I believe we had the motion. Okay, so all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, motion carries. All right, letter D, policies and procedures. The policies that are on and regulations that are on for first reading, policy 0151, policy 2415.05, policy 2451. A lot of numbers. Regulation 2460.30, policy 2622, regulation 2622, policy 9560. So those are all on for first reading, second reading. Maybe I'll do it. Policy 6115.01, .02 and .03, 6311 and policy 8600. Those are all on for second reading tonight. So may I have a motion for the approval of items 1 and 2?
Second.
Okay, any questions?
I do have one
Yes.
question.
Mhm.
I appreciate the notation about the mandatory policies. And the adult high school policy is not noted as mandatory, so I'm wondering like what was it just a Charles my recommendation that we have such a policy on adult high school? It didn't seem like anything that we were.
It is mandatory.
Oh, okay.
No. I think it is mandatory. We don't have an adult high school.
Right.
And interpreting Jack's notes.
So it just doesn't say him on the agenda.
But I think that's right.
I can speak to that. So we don't have an adult high school. We had an existing policy that basically just said, should we have an adult high school, these are the things that we would do. In the newly updated one, they have added language concerning in any adult high school that you would have to provide accommodations for students with disabilities or students with 504s. And so what we did is we're just updating our current one by adding the statutes that we would have to follow should we ever adopt a high school.
Mr. President, can I just to clarify, because I've never approved anything on the agenda, first reading, second reading. So first reading is we're approving that it will go to second reading, and that's when it gets implemented. And then on second reading, these policies, I know they're mandatory. They were on the December agenda, not the January agenda, just to be clear.
Correct.
So for those of us who were not board members, I read the policies. Should we be approving? Should we abstain? Since we weren't on the board at first reading, does that dictate how we behave tonight is my question.
Yeah, new members may vote if you feel that you've read the policy and heard the policy committee report, your questions were answered, you may vote.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we have a motion on the floor. Any other questions or comments? Okay, so we'll take a vote. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. Motion carries. All right, letter E, educational program. Number 1, Burlington County Alternative School Placement for 21-22. Number 2, home instruction, same period. Number 3, special education out of district placement for the same period. I'll entertain a motion for approval of items 1 through 3. Second. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, letter F, finance and business. Number 1, travel expenditures approval requests. Number 2, approval of state contract and consortium vendor purchases. Number 3, donations. This one I will give a little bit more attention. Recommend the board accept the following donation: 1,000 child-side masks and several canisters of sanitizing wipes from an anonymous donor to be used at the Everett Elementary School. Number 4, 2021 financial audit. 5, resolution for participation in joint services agreement. Number 6, transportation. Number 7, approval of codicil to the MEA Board of Education agreement. I will entertain a motion for approval of items 1 through 7. Second. Okay, any comments, questions? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries. All right. Letter G. Employee relations. Number 1, appointments. 2, retirements. 3, resignation. 4, change in position and hours. 5, additional class coverage. Number 6, leaves of absence. 7, extension of contract. 8, movement on the salary guide. 9, substitutes. 10, ESEA Title I tutors. 11, athletics and co-curricular clubs. See, I'll entertain a motion for approval of items 1 through 11. These are all as discussed in executive session. Approval of items 1 through 11. Motion, please. Second. Okay. Any comments or questions? Secretary, roll call vote, please.
Dr. Alberti,
Yes.
Mrs. Arcaro Burns,
Yes.
Mr. Fairchild, Mrs. Fallows Macaluso, Mrs. Nicopolis, Mr. Mono, Mrs. Villanueva, Dr. Snyder, Mr. Weeks.
Yes.
Thank you.
Motion carries. Just for informational, I'm sorry, suspensions, letter 10, X10. Suspensions, A, suspensions, B, superintendent's HIB report. Also, all as was discussed in executive. Entertain a motion for approval of these items. Got a choice there. Any questions or comments? Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Noted. Motion carries. 11, the informational only section. A, enrollment information. B, is there any old business? New business, actually have something for new business. I'll start and then we'll open it up. So proposing a letter A for board member resignation. After 4 years and 1 month of service to Morristown Township Board of Education, the board accepts with regret the resignation of board member Jack Fairchild effective February 13th, 2022. The motion I'm proposing is I recommend the board accept the resignations of the following board members: Jack Fairchild, effective February 13th, 2022. Should we go on and do any other new business?
We need a motion.
We need a, okay, for that one.
For that one.
Okay.
Second.
Okay, any comments?
I just wonder if the chair is going to public, what the process is for the replacement.
Good question. So what will happen here is, as we've done a few times, at least in my tenure, there will be an application process which will be posted sometime soon, in the very near future, for people to apply to fill that role. The board will look at what applications we get, determine how we will move forward in a process to evaluate those applications, and then appoint somebody to fulfill the part of his term that extends through the end of 2022. In November of 2022, Mr. Fairchild had 1 year remaining on his term after this one. So he was in year 2 of a 3-year term. So in November of 2022, on the ballot will be the 3 board member positions that are normally up for election for a 3-year term, and then 1 for a 1-year term that would start in January 23 and go through the end of 23. Then following that in November of 23, that position that Mr. Fairchild occupied would be up for a 3-year term. So there will be 4 on the ballot this November, in short, and somebody will be appointed to fulfill from whenever we appoint them this year through the end of the year. We get all that right?
Yep.
All right, I practiced. All right. Okay, so we'll do a vote on this one. So we had the motion. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay, that motion carries. Any other new business?
I have something, if I may. I'm not sure how to address this, so I'll share my thoughts and then get some feedback from you, Mick. I was really struck by the public comment about the experience that students, particularly at the UES. Personally, as a parent, I have a child at UES, the lunch experience. So I realize lunch is operations and clearly not a board matter. But when I think about kind of the root cause, it does strike me as this absence of clear top-down standards on everything from mask breaks to water fountains, and a lot of the COVID mitigation measures that we put in place that may have been good at the time, but those policies need to be reevaluated today, not when we get the updated Department of Health guidance. And so I would like to understand whether or not we can assess the lunch experience and other experiences of the students. It's clearly ticked and tied to, operations, but also the health and well-being and social and emotional experience of our children, which I do believe is something that the board should care about. And then, as I mentioned, also, I think it's very ticked and tied to the lack of clear and consistent top-down standards. There's a lot of discretion for how some of these COVID mitigation measures were operationalized in the schools. And so I'm not sure what the board's role is or how to make sure that this one moves forward. It's probably not even committee, but I guess, Mr. Volpe, I'm really looking to you for your leadership and thoughts on this one.
Yeah, that's my job. And I heard as well. And I sit here at the dais with you and I hear and understand your concerns. And it's certainly something that we will look into. If we decide to make some changes, I can certainly report back to the board about what we are doing. There are some things that we can look at right now. There are some things that I've heard that I wasn't even aware of. And I will use I've only been here for 2 months, maybe for another month or two. I've only been here for 4 months, but there are some things that we can start looking at right now, certainly. Ultimately, in the end, when we do have to make some further decisions, I do want to see the guidance, but I don't think there's going to be guidance about water fountains or how your lunchrooms are arranged. That's something that my administrative team can look at.
That's awesome. Thank you.
And just to speak to the board role in that, it is exactly what you just said. We're here to take information from the public. I think that was specifically mentioned on the side. Interpret the will and the concerns of the public. Share that with administration, and then I'm sure potentially that could be a finance and operations committee agenda item for the next meeting, where the administration reports back through that committee and that's to the rest of the board about what steps are being taken. So, okay. Any other new business or discussion? Actually, Mr. Volpe, let me
I
let
just
you.
wanted to address, because it's a concern that I've heard before. And I want everybody leaving on a positive note here. If there's anything I've learned about being in Morristown during this time, is we have a lot of passionate people here, passionate about kids and passionate about a lot of things. And I'll be speaking to Mr. Heiser, and we'll be thinking about the best way that we can show our federal grant money and what it's been spent on in a digestible format, may become part of my future comments. We may email people who ask us. But some of those things too, when the comment was made before about strings for federal money. Let me be clear about that. Federal money that came through, we had to use for some mitigation efforts related to COVID. Specifically, I'll give you just one example because I don't have all the information in front of me. We hired extra basic skills teachers for our students because going through COVID, students received learning loss. The only thing I want everybody to walk away with is you have good people sitting at this dais, and they don't always agree on everything, but they're very good people. We'll make it very clear. There is no quid pro quo in any way, shape, or form that if we continued to mask kids, we would get money for that. It did not happen. And the reason why we are continuing to mask children is because of the governor's executive order, which I did announce that effective March 7th, we will be mask optional. So I know some things may have been said and people may be a little confused, but I will try to make that more clear and transparent. And I want everybody letting you to know that you have people sitting up here who care very much about kids and would have been the first to blow a whistle to say, hey, we were told we would get a bribe essentially to keep masks on. So I want you walking away tonight feeling a little bit better about that and know that further communication will be on the way about that. I hope that helps clarify some things.
Thanks, Mr. Volpe. And I'll just piggyback on that and say, we do want to address the concerns. We want to make sure the information's out there. And so, right there, kind of an example of what we'd like to do. If you have concerns, if you have questions, please reach out through the proper channels. While we do have to maintain the structure and the regulations that we operate under, we are trying to, within that structure, expand the opportunities. And also, frankly, to Cheryl's point, I believe it was, make people aware of those avenues and encourage you wholeheartedly to utilize those processes. Ask us the questions. We will certainly provide you the information in the appropriate manner, because that's the structure. That's how it works. So with that, if there is no additional new business or comment, we can move back into the more open public comment section of the agenda. So yeah. Second. Okay. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? Okay. So again, as a reminder, please come up to the mic, state your name and address. You will have 3 minutes to speak. As we just discussed, not a question and answer session, but please avail yourself of one of the many avenues to ask questions if you have one. Please do not address board members individually and be respectful when making public comment. With that, I'd like to ask anyone who'd like to make a comment to please come to the microphone. Be shy. Okay. Yes.
I'm not shy, Mick. I do want to thank you. I thought that your opening statement, I think Mr. Volpe's, and then even Mr. Camagno's affirmation, you all were unified and on the same page as far as why the decision was made for March 7th, and also the impact of guidance. And I think that has been a big frustration in the community, especially us lawyers who know the difference between guidance, executive orders, regulations, and statutes. So I really appreciate the communication. I also want to share that this was, I know that based on what John showed, that you don't want to do committee work at the dais, but there also is something very satisfying as a member of the community to sit here and actually hear some of our thoughts being asked by some of the board members, so that you won't necessarily have a lot of public comment because there's been dialogue. So in my job, we call it watching the sausage be made, right? So it was pleasant to watch a little bit of the sausage be made tonight, and I want to thank you.
Thank you. Floor is still open. Okay. All right, reading body language. I think we can move or request a motion to close public comment. Okay, all in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions? All right. Moving on. I will entertain a motion for adjournment. Seconds. We'll just take one of those. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Abstentions?